Amazing boy discovers sabotage in plane, surprising everyone by saving a billionaire's life. Ethan Thompson could hardly believe his eyes as he stood before the sleek, polished corporate jet, the embodiment of his dreams. This was a mere reward for winning the school science competition, but it felt like an open door to the sky. Yet, beneath the thrill of aviation, his heart wrestled with something darker, the unsettling whispers he overheard moments before the tour started. Did he really just discover a scheme to sabotage a billionaire's jet? Doubt crept in. How could a 12-year-old boy be taken seriously if he spoke up? What if he was wrong? The weight of the decision pressed heavily upon him. Silence could mean disaster, yet his voice could easily be dismissed. During the tour, Ethan's mind raced as he carefully studied the aircraft's maintenance logs, pages filled with discrepancies that nobody seemed to notice. Each detail overflowed with irregularities, maintenance schedules that didn't match the operational records, missing entries that screamed red flags. However, it all felt like too much a child against the world of grown-ups, armed only with what he had read in manuals. No one would care about a kid with wild imagination. Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the urgency grow in his chest. What if the log showed signs of negligence that could put lives at risk? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the jet ascended into the sky, his internal conflict escalated, doubling down on his anxiety. Otherwise, it was just another day for the billionaires and their pilots, but not for Ethan, a boy on the cusp of uncovering potentials beyond adulthood but shackled by his youth. He glanced around at the adults enveloped in minor conversations, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside him. What if they were complacent? From within the cockpit, muffled conversations shimmered through the air, two crew members, eyes scanning nervously, exchanging whispers that felt out of place. Something wasn't right. Am I the only one noticing this? The question hit him harder than the sun glinting off the wing. Ethan's palms were sweaty, heart racing at the thought of exposing what he had pieced together. Exposing a potential threat could be monumental, but the fear of being ridiculed stuck like a stone in his gut. Just when Ethan thought that enduring the flight would grant him some clarity, alarms suddenly erupted, an unforgiving cacophony that shattered the calm atmosphere. Chaos reigned. As panic spread like wildfire, Ethan's instincts kicked in. He remembered what he'd studied: mechanics, protocols, the rhythm of flight systems. With every shout and shriek from the crew, a clarity took hold, his knowledge coalescing into action. He leaned forward, voice shaking yet resolute. If we reroute power to the backup system, we might stabilize the flight. The captain's eyes flicked toward him, skepticism mingling with a grudging respect. Each moment he remained silent felt like a sin, and yet, facing his truth bore consequences he could hardly fathom. Ethan found himself in an impossible situation, one that could redefine him. He was no longer just a boy dreaming of airplanes, he was now a boy facing the potential to save lives or watch chaos consume everything he held dear. All he could do was hope. Suddenly, Richard Lawson turned his gaze toward Ethan, recognition dawning in his eyes. It was a long way from just a child, navigating an impossible choice. The stakes had risen beyond imagination, and Ethan realized he had no choice but to embrace the storm brewing both within and around him, as the aircraft teetered on the brink, and his future hung by a thread. Ethan felt the vibrations of the aircraft responding erratically beneath him, and the pressure of every adult's gaze seemed to dissolve his youth in an instant. He was no longer a bystander, he was an unexpected participant in a high-stakes game. Fear coiled in his stomach as he recognized the implications of his suggestion. The crew and passengers depended on actions that he, a 12-year-old boy, had initiated, twisting the narrative he had always known about himself. Taking a deep breath, he focused, forcing his mind to sift through the chaos. We need to act quickly, he continued, his voice steadier than he felt. There should be a manual override for the backup systems in the cockpit. It could help us stabilize the power before anything worse happens. The captain met his gaze, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but amid the turmoil, he seized a hint of trust. Encouraged by the brief moment of connection, Ethan adjusted his posture, as if channeling the aura of professionalism he so admired in pilots. "Get to the manual, Ethan," Richard Lawson barked, his authoritative tone striking through the noise. "Show us what you know." Ethan's pulse raced, mixing exhilaration with dread. He surged forward, knowing that every second mattered. Moving past the crew, he squeezed into the confined cockpit. The sight of the array of switches and screens ignited a surge of excitement within him. It was everything he had studied, transformed into a living procedure. His fingers danced across the controls as he recalled diagrams and maintenance protocols, convinced that this was his moment to shine or to fail spectacularly. His mind flickered to the maintenance logs, to the records that had haunted him during the tour. Discrepancies began weaving threads of a larger story, and Ethan fought to piece it together as he interacted with the controls. This was not simply about saving a flight anymore, it was about confronting the negligence that had led to this disaster. A mix of determination and fear fueled his actions. "Start organizing the backup systems," Ethan urged Richard, peering at the switches. "If we can redirect the power, we might stifle the alarms." The tension crackled in the cramped space as Richard nodded, quickly following Ethan's instructions. Ethan's youthful confidence was tested with every flick of a switch. What if he miscalculated? What if he failed? However, doubts began fading into the background as a surge of clarity surged within him. Flickering lights danced across the dashboard, illuminating the hopes of those on board and fueling the desperate need for success that in a few minutes that felt like hours, the cockpit steered toward a calmer trajectory. The alarms faltered, replaced by a cautious silence. Breathless, Ethan turned to gauge the captain's reaction, who continued monitoring the controls with newfound resolve. Richard smirked, recognition tinged with respect glimmered in his eyes. "You might just save us all, kid," he said, yet, as an unexpected calm enveloped the cockpit, Ethan felt a pang of uncertainty rear its head again. Had they truly averted disaster, or was this merely a pause before the real storm? His heart thudded ominously as another thought pierced through: what would he do if they landed safely? Would he voice the discrepancies he'd noticed, or let the dread of being a child silence him? As the plane's path leveled and the turbulence began to ease, Ethan knew that whatever happened from here on out would shape him in ways he could not yet comprehend. The importance of his findings gnawed at him, pulling him in two directions, conforming to the innocence of his age or stepping forcefully into a world that had suddenly become perilous. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of responsibility twist around him as if the aircraft itself had bound him to its fate. The decision loomed like the horizon ahead. Would he conceal his discoveries, or step forward at the end of this flight, ready to confront an unseen danger lurking within the shadows of the aviation world, with his heart racing in his mind racing faster? The next few moments were critical, propelling him toward a reckoning that would define not just his day but the entire future he was beginning to carve for himself. The cockpit fell into a tense silence, a fragile truce in the wake of Ethan's frantic actions. As he inhaled deeply, a newfound determination surged through him. The reality of saving not just himself but everyone on board fueled an urgency he had never experienced. The AWOL alarms, the flickering lights, and the brief smile from Richard came with a consequence. He needed to confront the truth of what went awry. Ethan scanned the cockpit, where his fingertips still tingled from the switches he had manipulated. "What's next?" he asked, his voice steadying, assuming the role of a leader, albeit reluctantly. Richard was quick on the draw. He communicated with the cabin crew while maintaining a watchful eye on the instruments. "Air traffic control needs an update," Richard explained, his tone shifted from urgency to authority, as if Ethan had ignited something in him, too. "We need to clear this up before we can think about landing." Ethan felt a split-second doubt creep in. Was he even capable of guiding them through this? But he quietly pushed it aside, refusing to let that fear rob him of this moment. His mind raced as he considered the implications of the discrepancies he had noticed. Answers loomed just out of reach, begging for consideration, a haunting presence in his thoughts. "Richard," he said, hesitating only a moment, "I think there is something more to this flight than just an electrical failure." The words tumbled out before he could fully comprehend their weight. Richard met his gaze, something akin to curiosity animating his brow. "What do you mean?" "I've seen maintenance logs. There's been talk of shortcuts taken, parts that should have been replaced but weren't." Ethan took a breath, the enormity of what he was about to imply swelled within him. "We need to investigate if there's a connection. This wasn't just an accident." The captain raised an eyebrow, now stepping back, weighing this new information. The gravity of Ethan's assertion hung heavily in the air. "We'll look into it afterward, kid. Right now we have to focus on keeping this plane in the air." Richard stood resolute, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that urgency would yield to complacency if he didn't act, but act how? The knot in his chest tightened. Speaking up could brand him as a child meddling in adult affairs, but swallowing this truth could lead to devastating consequences. He felt the weight of an entire aircraft on his young shoulders, balancing responsibility against the marrow-deep urge for self-preservation that if they survived the flight, if he revealed what he knew, would he have the power to change things? The thought flickered in his mind like the lights on the dashboard. Becoming part of this system, rather than merely a casualty of it, was tantalizing but terrifying. As they approached their destination, Ethan prepared himself for the moment that would determine the trajectory of his life. Would he keep silent, whispering his knowledge into the quiet abyss? Or shout it out, risking the ire of those older and more experienced? The airplane glided toward a safe landing, but deep within him, turbulence raged on, a storm of conflicting emotions waiting to break free. Ethan closed his eyes for a split second, mentally piecing together the resolve he needed to brandish his newfound wisdom. The resolve that would either propel him into a world filled with potential or crush him under its gravity. He took one last glance at Richard, who was still processing Ethan's words, suffusing the cockpit with tension. If he was going to turn his knowledge into action, the time for hesitation was over. As the wheels touched down, bringing reality crashing back into focus, Ethan felt a wave of adrenaline surge through him. The end of this flight wasn't simply about salvation, it was just the beginning of an entirely new confrontation. Once they unloaded, that looming decision would crystallize into action. He would either wrestle with the darkness he sensed in the aviation world or silently accept the dangers hidden in shadows, accepting his role as an unwilling bystander. The moment of truth was at hand. Would he seize control of his destiny, or would fear keep him in the cockpit's shadow? The plane rolled to a stop, engines shuddering into silence. Ethan's heart raced, the adrenaline of the flight still coursing through his veins. He was conscious of Richard's discerning gaze every moment, dissecting his mannerisms, gauging the resolve in him. This was not simply a flight that had ended, it was now a catalyst for change, a fork in his life's path. As the cabin doors swung open, sunlight poured in, a harsh reality against the backdrop of his swirling thoughts. People filed out, relief palpable among passengers as they stepped onto solid ground. Ethan lingered, heart pounding, knowing the next steps could either solidify or obliterate his budding potential. "Ethan," Richard called, breaking him from his reverie. "Let us step back and discuss this." They moved out of earshot from the cabin crew, Richard studying him with furrowed brows. "I appreciate your initiative back there," he began, but the weight of his tone suggested a layer of caution. "But boy, you've stirred the pot. Are you certain of what you're suggesting?" The skepticism in Richard's voice struck Ethan, an echo of every doubt the seasoned pilot had faced in his own earlier years. Still, he couldn't retreat now. "If there's a chance that shortcuts led to this incident, we have an obligation to investigate. People's lives depend on that." The words hung in the air, charged with an intensity that both invigorated and terrified him. Richard nodded slowly, his expression softening, yet the doubt remained. "It's a dangerous road to walk, diving into corporate secrets. You need to know the stakes." Ethan felt resolve building within him, forcing aside any lingering thoughts of fear. "I have to know I did everything I could," he replied, voice steady. This was a bell he could not unring, a whisper in the dark could no longer suffice. "All right then, let's start with the maintenance logs. Meet me in the operations room," Richard instructed. There was a flicker of respect in his eyes, one that Ethan recognized as a path towards empowerment. With each step toward the operations room, thoughts clamored for attention. Was he prepared to confront the command of a system that often prioritized profit over safety? The room buzzed as they entered, a world of control and authority mixed with quiet urgency. Papers littered desks like fallen leaves, scattered evidence of previous neglect and oversight. Richard gestured toward a cluttered workstation. "The logs should be here. We have to piece together what went wrong." They dug through piles of documents, Ethan's fingers racing over deciphered codes and notations until inconsistencies arose, illuminating the murky waters of maintenance failures. Each revelation scratched at the back of his mind like a relentless itch. They were hiding something big. "We need to push this up the chain of command," Ethan said, his heart pounding a frantic drumbeat. "This must be taken seriously." Richard glanced over, caught between admiration for Ethan's tenacity and caution about the powers they would be challenging. "And what if they don't listen? What if your voice is silenced?" "Then I'll call the media," he blurted, fueled by anger flaring to life inside him. Mentioning the press felt bold, even reckless, but Ethan realized it was the only way to ensure the truth was known. Richard sighed, a mix of admiration and concern etched into his features. "You're stepping into a bigger arena than you realize. If this is what you want, you need to be prepared to face the consequences." Ethan swallowed hard, the reality dawning on him. He had opened a door, but he could not retreat. His heart thudded with uncertainty yet pulsed with newfound power. He had the knowledge, now he needed to choose whether to harness it or let it fade into the distance. "What is your decision?" Richard pressed, the question a critical pivot point that would define their next moves. Ethan held his breath, the gravity of the moment surging through him. Would he become a champion for change or a casual observer in a system yearning to maintain the status quo? The weight of his decision beckoned, a choice teetering on the edge of transformation. As the words gripped him, Ethan took a step forward, prepared to face the profound implications of his next move. The urgency of the moment was clear, the fight for accountability was about to begin. Would he have the courage to confront those in power, or would he silently shrink back into the shadows? With that, the door to the operations room closed behind him, locking away indecision while opening the gateway to a confrontation with the aviation industry that loomed just ahead, a battle for truth that would test his newfound resolve. The operations room bustled with energy, but to Ethan, it felt like a world unto itself, one filled with a haze of tension and unease. Richard sat across the table from him, his brow furrowed deeper now. The moment had shifted from a casual inquiry to a gravity-laden mission, propelling Ethan into unfamiliar territory where the consequences of ignorance could be catastrophic. "Let us focus on what we can substantiate first," Richard urged, the urgency in his voice slicing through the tension. "We need the logs to reveal a pattern, something actionable." Ethan scanned the chaotic desk, a faint pulse of excitement fueling his determination. He was hunting for truths buried beneath bureaucratic red tape and corporate obfuscation. Shuffling through the disarray, he spotted a series of maintenance records, their dates marred by ink smudges, but still partially legible. As he flipped through them, a series of missed checks and inadequate repairs came into focus, each one damning in its implications. "Richard," Ethan's voice strained, a cold knot twisting in his gut. "These records show consistent negligence. Key safety checks have been ignored." His heart raced, sensing the ramifications of what this could mean both for those who had flown on that ill-fated plane and for his own burgeoning career. Richard's expression morphed from concern to shock, eyebrows shooting upwards. "You're right. If we can prove this neglect was systemic, then we have a duty to take it further." "We can't let this continue," Ethan interjected, his desperation morphing into courage. Richard leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision now resting squarely on Ethan's shoulders. "But are you really prepared for the fallout? We could be up against powerful people. This is a multi-billion-dollar entity we're taking on. Ethan felt a surge of doubt bubble within him, yet it was swiftly overtaken by a swell of determination. He had already ventured down a path that could not be undone. I've already stepped into muddy waters. The only way out is through, he replied, his voice laden with conviction. They spent the next hour scrutinizing every detail, piecing together fragments of information that painted a picture of negligence. Each discovery fortified Ethan's resolve. He could sense the inertia building within him. This wasn't just an investigation, it was a personal awakening. Suddenly, Ethan's mind flickered with recognition. Richard, what if we set up a meeting with the safety board? They need to hear this before we escalate it any further. They're equipped to respond with authority. Richard's approval was palpable, but a shadow of disbelief still lurked in his eyes. You truly believe they'll take a rookie like you seriously? Why shouldn't they? Ethan challenged. This isn't just about me. It's about lives at risk. The truth deserves an audience. The two men spent the next few hours drafting a concise yet impactful presentation. As they prepared, each statistic and every anecdote sharpened Ethan's voice, transforming it into a tool for advocacy. Yet, lurking in the back of his mind, was the specter of doubt. Had he overlooked something crucial? As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting an orange hue over their workspace, they finalized their plans. Ethan could sense the shift in the room. It was charged with possibility. The journey they were embarking on would test not just their tenacity but also their moral fiber. A sudden thought struck him. What if this wasn't just about the company's shortcomings but also a revelation of his own capabilities? The intertwining paths of personal growth and professional responsibility intertwined in a way he had never anticipated. His ambition was igniting a new dimension of himself he hadn't known existed. Are you ready for this? Richard asked as they gathered their materials. Ethan took a deep breath, a heavy realization clenching his chest. This meeting could make or break him, not just in the eyes of the safety board but also in his own self-discovery. Ready or not, it's time to speak up. As they left the room, a sense of impending confrontation lingered in the air. They were on the threshold of change, stepping into a world both exhilarating and terrifying, and Ethan fully embraced the opportunity. But an unshakable thought gnawed at him: could he truly withstand the storm that was about to unfold? As he looked at Richard, a mix of concern and encouragement radiating from him, he wondered what awaited them in the corporate jungle, where his pursuit for accountability would be tested at every turn. The moment was approaching, and Ethan could feel it looming closer, a moment that would either see him rise like a phoenix or be reduced to ashes by the very system he sought to challenge. What he didn't know was that the forces opposing him were already gathering. Ethan could hardly believe the rapid transformation of the morning. What began as a mundane workday had spiraled into a momentous journey of advocacy and self-discovery. The corridors of the safety board were imposing sterile white walls adorned with portraits of previous leaders, all gifted at navigating the treacherous waters of corporate oversight. Each step he took was heavy with anticipation and dread. Stay sharp, Ethan. Focus on the facts, Richard whispered, breaking the tangible silence as they approached the conference room door. Ethan nodded, but he could feel the rising tide of anxiety. The reality of what lay ahead weighed more heavily than he'd expected. It wasn't just his career on the line, it was a quest to uphold integrity, to confront the abhorrent negligence that had cost lives. Ethan settled into a chair, the cold plastic offering little comfort. He glanced at Richard, who was reviewing notes on his tablet, his brows still furrowed with concern. As more board members filed into the room, their glances oscillated from curiosity to somber recognition. He could sense the expectations coalescing in the air. When the last board member entered, Ethan cleared his throat, the moment of truth holding him in its grip. "Thank you for seeing us," he began, channeling everything he could muster into those simple words. "Today, we present evidence of systematic negligence in our maintenance protocols. It's a situation that has put countless lives at risk." He spoke with urgency, unveiling statistics and case studies carefully curated with Richard's guidance. Each slide punctuated by a sense of foreboding, revealing the patterns of oversight that had become all too normal. Sweat pooled at his temples while he struggled to maintain eye contact with the board members. Yet with every assertion, something within him shifted. A nascent confidence rippled through his veins. This negligence is not an isolated incident, he continued, feeling the more substantial rhythm of his voice growing steady. Lives lost cannot be abstracted away. My intention here isn't just to highlight failures, it's to advocate for a future where safety is paramount and accountability isn't obscured. In that moment, Ethan felt the swirling doubts that had clouded his mind begin to dissipate, replaced by a fierce clarity. He understood then that this wasn't merely an opportunity to prove himself, it was about owning a role he never expected to have. Near the end of his presentation, he noticed a tall man at the back of the room, his powerful stance immediately recognizable. The CEO of the company, a titan who had maneuvered the entity through turbulent waters, was observing him intently. Ethan felt a mixture of fear and resolve. What consequences would arise from challenging such a formidable figure? When the discussion opened to questions, the CEO spoke, his voice deeply resonant. What do you propose as actionable solutions, Ethan? What is to stop us from repeating this cycle? Ethan's pulse quickened. This was the critical juncture. Not only did he need to respond but also to offer genuine insight. We need reform at both the management and operational levels: safety audits, employee training, and advocacy for a culture that prioritizes transparency and accountability. Silence ensued, the weight of his words settling heavily. The board members exchanged glances, a palpable tension looming in the air. The realization struck him, he was not simply a rookie anymore. He was an agent of change demanding accountability. Yet, as applause broke out, a seed of uncertainty sprouted again. Would they back his proposition, or would they sidestep the issue to preserve their interests? Very well, the CEO stated, tilting his head in acknowledgement, but know that pursuing such drastic changes will not come without intense scrutiny. Ethan locked eyes with Richard, finding solace in the shared uncertainty. This wasn't merely an investigation into negligence but an invitation to redefine his career and identity. The potential for impact pulsed with life, but it was a double-edged sword. What lay ahead for Ethan felt unclear. The challenge to uphold integrity and invoke change stung with the promise of conflict. Was he truly ready to face those who may perceive him as a threat to the status quo? As the meeting adjourned, the lingering thought haunted him: a storm brewed on the horizon, yet he felt strangely emboldened. The question lingering now: what would the next phase of this confrontation demand from him? Ethan paced the quiet confines of his office, heart racing, replaying every moment of the meeting in his mind. The board's murmurs, the CEO's piercing gaze, it all surged like a tidal wave within him. Had he crossed a line? Had he thrust himself into a game much larger than he realized? His palms felt clammy, clinging to the edge of the desk as he tried to ground himself. Change is not easy, Richard's voice echoed in his thoughts, urging him onward. He inhaled deeply, his thoughts coalescing into a singular determination. Advocating for safety was no trivial task, the stakes were profound. He was no longer just a cog in the corporate machine, he was an advocate, a defender of those so often overlooked. He began to draft an email, a follow-up to the board meeting that would outline the necessary steps moving forward. How could he bring broader awareness to these issues? He envisioned an online platform for employees to report grievances or safety concerns without fear of retaliation. But then doubt crept in again. Would anyone support such a radical shift? The company culture had thrived on silence and compliance, but in the quiet of his office, an ember of courage sparked. You are not alone in this, he whispered to himself. His thoughts turned to those lives that could be saved, the families spared from grief. Slowly but resolutely, he hit send, sharing his suggestions with the board. He might be a rookie, but he was resolute not just for his career, but for something greater. Later that evening, he met Richard for coffee, wanting to discuss the board's response and how to capitalize on the momentum. Over rich, dark brews, they dissected the day's events. Richard's face was earnest, reflecting the concern even as admiration flickered in his eyes. Ethan, what you did today was monumental, he said, stirring sugar into his cup. It's about time someone shook up the status quo. But we need to prepare for the backlash. This won't just be about safety, it'll be about power dynamics. Ethan felt the weight of Richard's words. How was he supposed to navigate this treacherous landscape without losing his footing? The prospect of facing the entrenched interests alarmed him, yet he found clarity in the stakes. If we rattle their cages, we could invoke real change, he said, his voice gaining fervor. And I'm willing to bear the consequences. Richard studied him for a moment, a proud glint in his eye. Then let us start developing a strategic plan. It will require courage and those around you will test your resolve. But, Ethan, you have something they don't: conviction. Ethan's heart thudded as he mulled over Richard's words. He realized Richard had not just seen him as a junior staffer, he now viewed him as a leader, worthy of responsibility and action. Back at home, as he prepared for bed, Ethan reflected on the whirlwind of emotions engulfing him. With excitement, there was also fear of confrontation, fear of failure. Would his newfound vision for the company resonate, or would he feel the weight of their opposition crushing his ideals? He glanced at the framed picture of his family on the bedside table, a reminder of the personal stakes involved. If he couldn't summon the courage now, when would he ever? Determined, he resolved to dive deeper into the labyrinth of corporate structure, to uncover allies and build a coalition of like-minded individuals. But who could he trust? He had to tread carefully and observe. As he settled into bed, sleep eluded him, with thoughts racing about the potential allies and hidden enemies within the company. The fate of his mission hung precariously in the balance. The following day would test not just his resolve, but the very fabric of his integrity. The question loomed large in his mind: was he prepared to expose the vulnerabilities of a billion-dollar empire? The next steps required thoughtfulness, strategy, and perhaps a bold move that could either cement his legacy or force him to retreat. What would he uncover in the shadows of the company that could change everything? Ethan awoke the next morning with a jolt, a sense of urgency propelling him out of bed. He was not merely attending another day at the office, he was stepping into a battlefield where caution and boldness would intertwine. The stakes were high, and as he prepared for work, every action felt fueled by determination. He had to build a network of allies, and rapidly, the morning commute turned into a strategic exercise. As he navigated the busy streets, Ethan mentally catalogued his colleagues, their strengths, weaknesses, and potential motives. Who was likely to empathize with his vision of safety? Who was staunchly loyal to the status quo? He was no longer just an observer but an architect of a movement, and he needed to plan his approach meticulously. Arriving at the office, he found the atmosphere charged with anticipation. The board's scheduled discussion about the safety platform had ignited chatter among employees. Some greeted him with nods of approval, while others' eyes flickered with apprehension. Ethan felt the weight of both support and scrutiny, but he was resolute. Those who remained silent were not his enemies, they were potential allies waiting for someone to speak up. He sought out Susan from HR, a typically reserved woman with a reputation for compassion. Approaching her with a genuine smile, he decided to take a risk. "Hey, Susan, do you have a moment? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the safety initiatives I proposed." Her surprise quickly transformed into a thoughtful expression, and she glanced around the break room as if gauging who might overhear. "I think it's a great idea, Ethan. Employees need a voice," she whispered, lowering her voice as they sidled into the corner. "But implementing change here is harder than it seems. There are many employees who fear retribution." Ethan leaned closer, conviction bubbling within him. "That's why I want to create a supportive network. If we can get others on board, we could bring real attention to these issues. Think about how many lives we could protect." Susan's eyes narrowed, contemplating the implications of the movement. "You're right. But we need to approach this carefully. There are risks involved." Determined to counter her hesitations, he replied, "I know there are risks. But stubborn silence only endangers everyone's safety. Together, we can change that." The resolve etched across his face seemed to win her over as she nodded slowly, her initial doubts slowly giving way to an understanding of the urgency. Encouraged, he organized an informal meeting that afternoon and invited key colleagues, those he trusted, those who had voiced concern previously. If they could just form that initial coalition, he believed momentum would follow. The conference room filled with apprehensive faces, but Ethan's energy began to silently stir the room. He laid out his vision: a safety platform, a support network, a place where employees could feel secure in raising their voices. The initial murmurings of agreement ignited a flicker of hope. However, dissent quickly foreshadowed the potential storm. "I'm all for safety, Ethan," James, a middle manager, scoffed. "But you know how this place is. Push too hard, and you'll find yourself on the wrong side of the executive team." An uneasy silence filled the air. Ethan could feel the room's energy shift as doubt threatened to strangle their budding coalition. Yet amidst the unease, he stood taller, his voice unwavering. "You're right, James. The system is rigid, but change requires risk. If we don't take a stand now, nothing will ever change. We can either continue to be complicit or spark a transformation." The tension thickened. His words seemed to hang in the air, a challenge against the oppressive culture of conformity. Would they rally behind him, or would his aspirations wither under a tide of fear? Ethan sensed the gravity of his situation. Each decision brought him closer to either triumph or defeat, and he needed to solidify the support or risk allowing his vision to slip into obscurity. As he looked around the room, he realized they were at the brink of a turning point. It was a matter of commitment. Heart racing, he regained his composure and projected conviction. "If we want change, we must embody it ourselves. Let us build something real together." The room fell silent, yet the whispers of uncertainty simmered beneath the surface, waiting for one person to make a decision that could alter the landscape of their company forever. Would they join him in reclaiming their safety, or retreat into the shadows of compliance? With every eye on him, the moment neared when he would either step into leadership or falter. He had initiated this ride, but now it was time to take a decisive stand. Would he break through? Ethan's mind raced as he contemplated the possibility of opposition lurking around the corporate corners. Was he ready to face the forthcoming confrontation? As the silence thickened, Ethan sensed the gravity weighing on his shoulders. He stood at the intersection of aspiration and fear, his colleagues' expressions a chaotic blend of anticipation and anxiety. Would they rise to join him, or would they retreat into the safety of complacency? The air in the room became stifling, the silence almost echoing. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. The stakes had never felt so tangible. He locked eyes with Susan, who had leaned in, demonstrating she was invested. Her gaze urged him to continue, to breach the void of uncertainty. "The safety platform isn't just a policy proposal," he implored. "It's a lifeline. We're not just here to make a point, we have the potential to change lives, our own, and the lives of those who trust us and depend on our well-being. This is not just a corporate mission, it's a human duty." James crossed his arms, skepticism etched across his features. "That sounds great, Ethan. But let us be real. You're talking about a massive shift in company culture. Is it worth risking your position? There are consequences to this." Ethan clenched his jaw, grappling with James's words. Was he willing to risk everything for this cause? He had built a life here, and the idea of jeopardizing his stability was unnerving. However, the thought of allowing fear to dictate his actions ignited a fire within him. "It is worth every risk," he asserted, voice fierce but raw with vulnerability. "Imagine working in an environment where you feel safe to speak your mind or report concerns without fear of backlash. We can create that together. It starts with us choosing to be brave. I'm asking you to trust that we can achieve this, but I cannot do it alone." A murmur of voices arose, a mixture of encouragement and doubt. He could feel the walls of apathy beginning to crack. Susan's hand raised slightly, silencing the crowd. "I believe in this," she said, her voice steady. "Safety has to come first, especially in our line of work. If anyone can make this happen, it's Ethan." Something within the room shifted. A few heads nodded in confirmation, and the atmosphere vibrated with renewed energy. Yet, as a wave of renewed hope cascaded around the room, Ethan caught sight of another face: Mark, a longtime executive known for his allegiance to the old guard. Mark's steely glare cut through the posterior chatter, and Ethan couldn't ignore the threat it posed. "Are we really doing this?" Mark addressed the room, sarcasm tipping his words. "This talk of safety and support? You risk uprooting everything we've built for a fleeting passion project. Think about the repercussions, Ethan. If you decide to push this, you better be prepared for the fallout." Ethan's mind churned, the warning echoed hauntingly. What had begun as a quest for change was now a confrontation with the status quo. He felt an innate urge to back down, but a deeper part of him, one that had spent sleepless nights envisioning a better workplace, shouted at him to stand firm. "I understand the risks, Mark," Ethan replied, his voice steady yet impassioned. "But the risk of inaction is far more dangerous. Sticking to the status quo isn't just stagnant, it endangers lives. We're not just discussing our jobs, we're discussing our ethics. We can't turn away from accountability, especially not now." With each word, he felt a surge of empowerment coursing through him, mingling with the tension enveloping the room. The boardroom transformed into a battleground where ideologies clashed, but Ethan knew this moment was pivotal. It was not merely a discussion, it was a decisive shift, one that could redefine workplace culture. That he glanced around once more, assessing the flicker of hope ignited in some eyes, juxtaposed against the foreboding shadows in others. How deeply rooted were their fears? How many would choose to follow him into the unknown, and how many would still err on the side of caution? As their eyes met, Ethan recognized a newfound strength swelling within himself. He was more than just a voice, he was beginning to emerge as a leader for a cause that transcended the confines of office politics. But that realization came with a chilling notion. To accomplish his vision, he would need to take even bolder steps. He could not remain passive in the face of potential sabotage and doubt. The time had come to take action. Straightening his shoulders, he resolved to uncover the hidden resistances, not just around him but within himself. What obstacles would present themselves, and how far was he willing to go to protect what he believed in? With a burning resolve flickering in his heart, he steeled himself for the challenges ahead. This was just the beginning. Ethan's journey was shaping into something he hadn't anticipated. What sacrifices would he need to make, and how would they define him in the days to come? Little did he know, the most formidable adversaries were watching and would not allow him to break the mold without a fierce fight. Ethan Thompson stood before a grand conference table, his heart pumping with a mix of determination and uncertainty. He was no longer just the boy who saved a flight, he was now the face of a movement demanding accountability in aviation safety. The board meeting had shaped his path, forging a new identity: advocate, leader, and visionary. The weight of expectation loomed overhead, but each pulse of electricity from the assemblies around him galvanizing his resolve. Weeks had passed since he first confronted the corporate system that had prioritized profits over lives. The evidence Ethan had uncovered about negligence within maintenance protocols had catapulted him into the spotlight, igniting conversations within the company that had long been quelled. Each day brought tenacity, newfound respect, and a growing responsibility to elevate the mission. As Ethan prepared for the next safety board meeting, he found himself reflecting on his growth. He was no longer held back by insecurity, self-doubt had eroded under the force of his determination. Standing in front of the mirror, he could see the boy he had once been juxtaposed against the individual he was evolving into: confident, reliant, transcending expectations. The day of the meeting arrived, and anticipation coursed through his veins. The room was assembled with both allies and adversaries, a mix of familiar faces filled with palpable tension. Mark, the ever-skeptical executive, eyed him critically. Richard stood beside him, a steady anchor, projecting unfaltering faith in Ethan's ability to steer the conversation. It was time to harness the momentum Ethan had ignited. Ethan began with a succinct, powerful address to the participants, highlighting the key findings from their safety investigations and expressing the urgency for systemic change. He showcased testimonials from employees who had braved the risks of speaking out, painting a vivid picture of their dedication to safety and accountability. With each assertion, the fears that had haunted him faded into a determined resolve. This was his moment. They should know that every report matters, Ethan pressed, voice rising in intensity. We have the platform to save lives, let us not squander it. The atmosphere focused around him, and in that moment, Ethan recognized his transformation. He was no longer just advocating for change, he was embodying it. A moment of connectivity emerged as several board members nodded in agreement, affirming his vision. The room began to move, discussions igniting amongst participants as they began contemplating actionable pathways forward. The implementation of a robust reporting platform will take courage, but it will give our employees a voice they've lacked for too long, Ethan said, buoyed by a wave of enthusiasm. This was not merely about the plane repairs and protocols, it was about shifting the corporate culture toward accountability and transparency. Finally, it was time for the discussions to open to questions. Ethan, Mark challenged, leaning forward, how do you suggest we mitigate the backlash from upper management? They want to be keen on these shifts. Ethan inhaled deeply, feeling the eyes of the room on him once more, an absorbing pressure that had once petrified him. He realized that the path had transformed from anxiety into a newfound strength. Change is inherently challenging, Mark, he countered, meeting the executive's gaze without faltering. But it's necessary. The safety of our employees and passengers must come first. If we want to remain relevant, we need to adapt not just for us but for the future of aviation. As he spoke, he could see some hearts softening, the wavering line of policy becoming less rigid. His vision was becoming tangible, and his unwavering moral compass became a beacon for all those in attendance. After moments that felt like eternity, Mark reluctantly nodded, sensing the tide turning. Others began voicing their support, with ideas blooming like spring flowers through the cracks of resistance. By the end of the session, Ethan had succeeded in gaining the board's approval for the safety platform. The exhilaration swept through him like wind beneath a soaring bird. The cacophony of doubt dissolved, replaced by energetic applause and dynamic discussions about actionable steps. With every heartbeat, he felt his confidence solidify, knowing that he had made an indelible mark on his professional landscape. Stepping back into the dim halls of the building, Ethan glanced at Richard, who clapped him on the shoulder with sincere pride. It signified not just a victory over the corporate landscape, but a signal of transformation for Ethan himself. He now validated his voice in a world that might once have silenced him. Reflecting on the multitude of small, courageous steps that brought him here, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He had architected a future not only for himself but for those around him, discovering a deep competence within. The journey had demanded extraordinary growth, and Ethan emerged not just as an advocate, but as a leader who navigated the tumultuous waters of authority with conviction. With a renewed focus and the internal fire of purpose kindled, Ethan stepped out into the bright light of the world outside the corporate confines. The future he envisioned was no longer a mere dream, it was now a tangible reality waiting to unfold, a blend of accountability and assurance ready to safeguard lives. And this was just the beginning. Underscore 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 underscore. You need to subscribe now to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and let us know you support this transformative journey. Comment your reactions and theories about this powerful conclusion. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this inspiring resolution. Don't wait even one more second. Your support is crucial.